Uh, Friends, neighbors, and comrades, welcome to our webinar. It is hosted by the Anti-War, Anti-Imperialism Working Group of the Socialist Party USA, and we are very fortunate to have some very, very, very talented individuals that are going to share experiences with us. Um, just so you know, the Socialist Party USA is a socialist political organization and it has chapters across the country. We organize in our communities through party locals and through things as national working groups, like is the host of this. Um, we believe electoral work needs to be completely outside of the capitalist parties. Um, and we are a multi-tendency socialist party, um, and that means that we orient ourselves around principles of agreement, right? Um, our members have sometimes have different varying political philosophies, but as long as they agree to our statement of principles, and we are socialist and anti-capitalist, we tend to work together and bring in everybody's experience and blend it into how we react. Uh, and how we, our struggle and praxis and all that. And we invite you to join us at the end of the webinar. We do have an information page that has links for everybody's organization that's on the call as opposed to ours. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I would like to thank our panelists. I really appreciate the work that y'all do, and I think it's important work, and I think it even translates even outside of the military-industrial complex when it comes to organizing against any kind of corporate takeover at the local level. So I appreciate that. I'm going to hand over the meeting to Will Sishi, who is our comrade in Arkansas, and thank you all very much.
Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Will Sichi. I am the Southeast Regional Coordinator of the Socialist Party USA and a member of the National Executive Committee. It's been my honor and privilege over the last few months and in some cases years to have organized with these amazing folks we have on the call tonight. At this time, to set the intention of the space, we will be providing an environment with opportunities for learning and growth with a continuous commitment to trust, vulnerability, and responsibility. We will have a focus on building, maintaining, and empowering community members to recognize, acknowledge, and move through conflict, mistakes, and harm in ways that catalyze repair, justice, and liberated innovation. This is an environment that is dedicated to no longer perpetuating the same oppressive dynamics internally that we are seeking to transform systemically. Before we begin, it's critical to honor and acknowledge the area in which we will be discussing is the rightful land of the Kickapoo, the Oceti-Sankoe, and the Osage. Colonialism and imperialism driven by the military-industrial complex continue to spread across our country. In Arkansas, we have begun a strong and successful fight to challenge this, and we hope others are inspired to take action in their own communities, whether through fighting an IDA or other efforts. While this call is hosted by the Socialist Party USA and features speakers from specific organizations, our recent victories were only possible because of a broad collective collaboration. They are the result of a shared struggle, and we want to recognize the many organizations that stood with us in this fight. In no particular order, Arkansas Justice Reform Coalition, Zero Hour, Arkansas Anti-War Alliance, Northwest Arkansas Democratic Socialists of America, Friends of Palestine Northwest Arkansas, Buyback Coalition, and the Benton and Washington County Democrats, as well as countless other individuals and activists that have taken a stand against the military drone manufacturing. It's now my pleasure to introduce Abel Tomlinson, who is the founder of the Arkansas Anti-War Alliance, with whom I've had the pleasure of attending demonstrations with, not only at the National Aerospace Defense Summit held annually in Arkansas, but also into the offices of Tom Cotton and Steve Womack. Abel is a veteran journalist, published in many outlets, including Covert Action, and was a Green Party congressional candidate in 2008. Abel, welcome and glad to have you. We also have Sarah Moore, who is one of the co-founders of the Arkansas Justice Reform Coalition, started in January of 2019 with the initial focus of stopping jail expansion, which has to date prevented over $300 million in needless incarceration in Northwest Arkansas. Arkansas Justice Reform Coalition advocates for ending mass incarceration through education and awareness, direct aid, and policy and legislative change led by the individuals and families directly impacted by the criminal legal system. Sarah is a member of Northwest Arkansas NAACP Legal Redress Committee, National Lawyers Guild, the NWA Continuum of Care, and League of Women Voters. In January 2023, Sarah began serving on the Fayetteville City Council as a council member of Ward 2 with a focus on creating greater equality in the city of Fayetteville. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you.
Lastly, but certainly not least, we have Jesse Buchanan, a member of Warkensaw and Friends of Palestine NWA, which has really helped keep the public pressure and spotlight on the ways that Arkansas has enabled the genocide in Gaza. They host direct aid fundraisers for families in Palestine and bring public awareness to what our politicians are enabling. An amazing feat in a state that sent nearly $50 million to Israel last year in bonds and that heavily censors all critics of the regime. We've got about 60 minutes to cover a lot, and then we know some people want to ask questions, so let's go. Just to kind of dip our toes in, and this is kind of for all the panelists, so feel free to jump in. But Abel, we'll go ahead and start with you. Arkansas has recently become a major hub for weapons production, but this shift didn't happen overnight. Once known primarily as the nation's leading rice producing and exporting state, Arkansas's agricultural economy has been reshaped by imperial and colonial capitalist interests into one of the country's leading weapon exporters. How did this transformation happen, and what warning signs should people in other agricultural states like Iowa, Missouri, or Idaho be watching for?
Well, I mean, there has been a lot of weapons production in southern Arkansas for some time, and as you may know, that Lockheed Martin, the biggest weapons manufacturer, has intentionally put weapons parts of their weapons in almost all the congressional districts in the United States. So that makes it where it's harder for national congressional candidates to oppose the military complex, because then they'd be cutting jobs. But it's kind of a new thing, though, that they're going to try to bring the weapons industry into Northwest Arkansas, because it hasn't been a big deal here. And so with the IDA and with SWARM and all this, it's bringing the military industrial complex to our doorstep. I mean, I guess there was also some, a lot of militarism in Fort Smith. They have the Ebbing Air Force Base where they have drone pilots, and now they have the F-35 training program. They train foreign pilots to fly F-35s that we're selling to all these countries around the world. And they're coming here to Drake Field. I live right across the street from Drake Field, our local airport. And I see the F-35s coming in now and shattering our ears and scaring our kitties. But yeah, it really is this IDA, and Ron Maloney is really behind a lot of it. Northwest Arkansas Council, bringing this all in here. He seems to be tied to all of it. He's like the spearhead of bringing the military complex to Northwest Arkansas and all the FOIA documents.
A lot of this, though, I think really ties to, Arkansas is an incredibly poor state. And if you think about agriculture, I mean, that was the backbone. And so as you did see some erosion, the conversation always becomes in communities about job creation and economic development. And so that's a hard narrative to counter, right? And so I think that becomes the challenge that happens in these communities where they don't feel that they are faced with many choices. And so they kind of buy into the state narrative that, this is great opportunity for you, don't ask too many questions, like we're not going to reveal too many details around these projects, just give you the little bit that you need to know, and know that, your community will have some revenue, you'll have some sales tax, and you'll have job opportunities for folks, especially, in a state, like Arkansas, where if you think about asset limited, income constrained households, it's like 50% of our communities are that or below. And so, we have incredible struggle to make sure that folks can make ends meet. And so for Arkansans, they see this as a possible pathway to opportunity and prosperity.
Seems like it's a similar dynamic with the prisons. We have all these prisons in poor communities, and it's like, well, these are jobs. You get all these prison guards you're giving them jobs,
Yeah, exactly. Jesse, I think you with Arkansas, you all have worked on some information regarding the the production facilities in Camden. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that? I mean, I know it's not specifically Northwest Arkansas, but just kind of broad overview. I mean, uh, the kind of specifics, that Arkansas is exporting.
Yeah, so Camden, Arkansas is a special, special little town where both my grandparents are from, actually. And it is not the place that you would think that this much manufacturing is going on, but the four of the largest weapons manufacturers in the country are all operating there. You've got Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Raytheon, which I think is now called RTX technically, and uh, Harris as well. So we've got four major weapons manufacturers making components for specific rockets that are often used by the U.S. and its allies against marginalized groups. You see them used in Palestine, you see them used in Iran, you see them used in Lebanon. And that's only one town in Arkansas. And there are several weapons manufacturing facilities across the state. Our group, Workinsaw, is actually a branch off of Friends of Palestine, Northwest Arkansas, because we realized how big of an issue this is becoming and how much focus is required to address the fact that Arkansas is becoming one of the leading weapons manufacturers in the country. And we really need to be able to not only educate people on the fact that that's happening, but make sure that there are strategies for how to address these companies and the way that they affect our communities, because um, it's not just about economic growth. It's not just about developing defense technology. These companies are actively harming our communities as well. They're ruining a lot of the local communities because they're either contributing to pollution in the area or um, they are creating terrible work conditions for the workers that they're claiming to create these jobs for. They're not contributing very much to the quality of life to the state of Arkansas, if anything at all. Um, and these companies are basically treating the state of Arkansas as just their own playground at this point. And so Camden is, I would say, the number one spot that you can look at because it's got so many companies there. But when you look at Arkansas, you've also got a lot of manufacturing being done in Little Rock. One of our leaders just bragged the other day that the bullets being used by the IDF are manufactured and shipped out of Little Rock, Arkansas. We see new reports pretty regularly at this point of white phosphorus munitions being used coming out of Pine Bluff Arsenal, which is the only manufacturer of white phosphorus munitions in the Northern Hemisphere. And then now we've got more sophisticated technologies coming for Northwest Arkansas with this influx of the idea that we're going to have more high-tech jobs in the more liberal, elite, educated area of the state that are going to boost the local economy here because we have sort of the base for these tech positions and this connection to the university that provides some sort of well-educated base for people looking for higher paying jobs in this area. And that's the way that it's kind of pitched is this, it's perfect fit for the region. It's this perfect thing that's going to support the state of Arkansas. It's going to connect with the university and provide these new engineering jobs, these new tech jobs for recent graduates. But all of that is just a nice way to coat the fact that they're actively seeking out communities that um, are struggling in order to find a foothold in our local economies and build these businesses into our local infrastructure and into our communities without giving everybody the real picture of what's going on.
I could add something onto that with the university is that so I mean we have this issue with Swarm when this drone factory here next to my house when they opened up the chancellor was there gave a speech and some people were surprised I wasn't surprised it's more disappointed because he actually was involved with organizing on campus with the university's nuclear weapons program and that's something that's been going on for quite some time now and I had a campaign to try to stop the nuclear weapons program. It's something not that many people know about. but the university has contracts with the Honeywell Corporation with their national security campus in Kansas City, where it's also the engineering college. And we did a couple FOIA requests and got their master collaboration agreements, their contracts. And so, their engineering students and professors are working on components of nuclear weapons here. And these are weapons that, there's now an international treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, to make them illegal. So you could argue, in a sense, that the university is involved in illegal nuclear weapons production, yeah, I mean, it's so the university has deep ties to this weapons industry now.
I'm glad you both brought that up. We'll get to the university because I think that's an important topic to touch on. But just so to catch everybody else up that's on the Zoom and the YouTube, here, when they tried to bring this to Northwest Arkansas, they used the Industrial Development Authority, or what we call in short-term IDA. So if you hear any of the speakers talking about an IDA, that's what it stands for. Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about what an Industrial Development Authority is, particularly in this context? And then we can kind of open it up to all the speakers to kind of discuss how this entity was kind of the gateway they wanted to use to bring this manufacturing in, right? Because if you just come into a community and say, hey, guess what? You guys are all going to be producing bombs. Everybody's kind of like, no. I mean, sometimes people are yes and excited about it, but most people aren't thrilled about the prospect of having a weapons industry and all the testing and resources that go along with it in their community. So Farah.
Yeah. So the Industrial Development Authority, so we have in the state of Arkansas around economic development, we have a limited use of these in regard to our ports. And so you don't think of Arkansas as having, waterways where we have ports, but we do have like the Arkansas River. And so like in Little Rock, we have the port and the Port Authority. And they have used these types of development authorities in an effort to drive certain, businesses into the community, again, to grow the economy and grow jobs. And so, much like lots of economic development arms that are probably across the country are probably similar to Arkansas, there are a lot of like protections in place whenever you're looking at economic development that allow for kind of a layer of secrecy due to, competitive advantage and, industry secrets that you might have in regard to your industry when you're looking. So this Industrial Development Authority kind of takes it a step further, that it creates an actual area, a region, a city, a county, a set of counties that adopt in and are actually able to have power that's outside of elected bodies. And so a board gets seated to represent those entities of that geography, and they aren't elected, they're appointed. And they have the power to do things like eminent domain of portions of land, large swaths of land without really, a lot of questions asked. And they also end up with the ability that they're having, lots of conversations that are not fully, public or vetted to entice and to entertain particular industries that, may or may not be fully accepted or wanted by the local communities. And so, you've seen a lot of pushback here in the state of Arkansas about this particular authority and some conversation during fiscal session about the potential. It just actually fell today out of committee. It needed to be able to be outside of appropriations bills during fiscal session. You have to go through a certain process, and they went through Rules Committee, and they did not allow them to be heard to be voted on. But they were looking at even making a change to that development authority because there's a great desire by some in our state to be able to get that authority off the ground. And I think really the lessons learned from that are just that land use policies and economic policies about these, types of entities that we start to look at that we think maybe are these like pathways to prosperity. I mean, you always, the devil's in the details, and really, unfortunately, means that, those of us that are already busy in our day-to-day lives, it's like adding one more thing to think about. Like, you hope that the people that are representing you are, paying attention. But what happens oftentimes is we're all very busy. And we're looking for folks that we trust, that might be your chambers, or might be a certain regional partnership partner, that tells you, hey, like, this is a great thing, it does this, 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 and you're busy, and there's hundreds of pages, or many pages of something to read. You hear, oh, it has these benefits to it, but you don't think about asking some of the potential drawbacks. And so, I think it's a watch out for us in Arkansas going forward. I think it's a watch out for across the country, that these are, the maneuvers that can happen around, things for land use, things for economic development, that I think are, something that can seem on the surface to maybe create opportunity, that also at the same time can also potentially have all this downside. And so in certain parts of the state of Arkansas, for instance, in our more economically challenged parts of the communities, they might desire to see an authority like this stood up in a certain way, because they may be seeing every industry leave, and yet they may not even have a major retail store as a revenue generator. And so it's incredibly important too to really think about how important like local control is as well, that there's oversight, that there's the ability for local taxpayers and community members to really like weigh into the process, and to like be a part of like shaping whatever these tools are in our communities, versus them just like happening outside of us and just being like kind of parachuted into our communities and kind of sold to us. And so we're going to have, this is just one of the things that's come up in Arkansas. I think we're going to see many more of them here in our state. I know that there are things that voters will be voting on too, looking at economic authorities in the future. And so it's something to ask deeper questions, to understand what the benefits and the risks are potentially, when we're setting up entities like this.
Excellent. Thank you. For Jesse and Abel, I know you both obviously with Friends of Palestine Northwest Arkansas, and then the Arkansas Anti-War Alliance. How you both are opponents of the weapons industry. I know both of your organizations have opposed the aerospace defense industry summit in Northwest Arkansas specifically, and then obviously across Arkansas. I guess from both of your organizations' perspective, what was the feeling, being so close to this and then realizing that this was how they were starting to push in? What was kind of the thoughts to mobilize once you were aware that this was how this was going to happen? And Abel, I'll let you go first, and then Jesse will let you go.
Yeah, well, I did organize anti-war organizing for over 20 years since the Iraq War started, Iraq war crime, and I'd actually took a break, and it was just going to focus on journalism because that's really what I like to do. I like to write, and I kind of wasn't organizing for a while, and then the Swarm Arrow opened across the street for me, so I was one of the first people to report on it. There was no news reports. The city government didn't report on it. I'm driving by this sign. I see this Swarm Arrow sign out in front of my house. I'm like, what the hell is this? I start looking it up. I'm like, oh my God, it's this drone weapons factory. And there was no news reports. The only thing I could find on it was a flyer from the Fayetteville Chamber of Commerce that said, oh, there's going to be a ribbon cutting ceremony in a few days. And so I felt compelled to organize, and I organized a protest of the ribbon cutting ceremony. And yeah, I mean, and it's kind of just snowballed a little bit since then, because I, saw what they were doing, the Industrial Authority. I saw how it was interlinked and how Madison County had just shot it down. And I saw how there was the weapons industry was linked into this Industrial Authority, and this Ron Maloney guy with the Northwest Arkansas Council, which is, essentially the big business lobby. The newspapers kind of whitewash what it is. They try to say, well, this is a a friendly, neighborhood group of people getting together, nonprofits. And no, it's a big business lobby. It represents the billionaire interests. The Waltons are all behind it. Tyson, all the other big corporations in Northwest Arkansas. Maloney was asked when the people rose up in Madison County to shoot it down for the first time. He kind of lied to the people on video, and he said, I don't work for the Waltons," or you can try to say that, but he's definitely funded by the Waltons. And so, and I saw how he was proposed to put a huge weapons testing facility in Madison County called the Ares, ARES. He was one, and I don't know if that was going to be, be established through the powers of eminent domain. You maybe take a bunch of people's land so they can test weapons over there. And the more I dug on this guy, you can find his LinkedIn, especially if you go there, just almost all of his posts on LinkedIn and his comments are almost all about weapons. He travels all over the world to these weapons expositions in other countries and all these weapons testing exercises with NATO and everything. And he's all about the military industrial complex. And all of his comments, most of the comments on LinkedIn are to all these various weapons corporations, especially drone weapons, especially AI drone weapons. And he's like, trying to tell them, hey, let's link up. And he's essentially trying to recruit them to come to Northwest Arkansas, companies like Swarm Arrow. And, they shot that down. And so I got really inspired to try to fight the industrial authority because I could see what was happening. And just more and more information keeps coming out about this. Another element was this Hephaestus Forge. They're going to try, I think they are in the process of creating a huge weapons industrial facility right next to XNA Airport. And it's going to be a foreign trade zone is what they call it. So I think they're going to set up huge weapons factories. They've already approved the zoning through the Highfield city government to change the zoning designations there so they can produce weapons. And since it's a foreign trade zone, I guess that means they're going to be exporting weapons from Northwest Arkansas to other countries, blatant war profiteering, making the world more dangerous. And and that's pretty much what he lives and breathes, but he doesn't say any of that when he's proposing this to all the county governments. He doesn't say, hey, I want to bring a bunch of weapons industry here. And I assume AI data centers are a huge part of it too. I'm pretty sure that's another element of what they're planning to bring. He tries to say they're not, but I don't trust the word he says. But anyway, Highfield just voted on that. This week they had they were going to just do all three counties voted it down. It was going to be three counties, Madison, Washington, and Benton County. All three counties ultimately voted down the industrial authority. So kind of not good for him. But now he's also proposing just a citywide industrial authority in Highfield. And I assume that's tied into this weapons industrial facility they're building next to XNA Airport. But anyway, they postponed the final vote in Highfield. They're going to have another vote, I think, in a week or two. I don't know if I answered your question. What was it?
Oh, just the organization's reaction and sort of how you felt you needed to organize around this once you found out that it was through the Industrial Development Authority that this was how the weapons industry was going to try and come into the community.
Yeah.
Jesse.
Yeah. So we actually found out about Swarm Arrow first, which for those following online, Swarm Arrow is a new startup company that's producing AI-powered swarms of military drones that are 41 feet wide, about the size of a personal private airplane. And the idea is that they would be AI guided and AI targeting autonomous groups that function collectively to surround and attack individual targets. And this is a company that Friends of Palestine already was aware of because they had planned to open an office in Rogers, Arkansas, which is about 25 minutes north of Fayetteville. And we knew that office was coming up, and they announced that office in 2024. And since we saw that was going through, we've been waiting to see when they were going to start trying to manufacture. So it was really shocking to learn that they were opening a facility in Fayetteville, where our group meets regularly and where many of our members live, and that we hadn't heard anything about it on the city level. We're watching this company. We also have several members of our group who are active members of like local political life, including myself, and we are very aware of the things developing in our city. And so the fact that that came to light with absolutely no warning and 2 days before the ribbon cutting ceremony, we see this flyer from the Chamber of Commerce about the ribbon cutting. We find out that the university is involved, that members of the city government were invited to speak, that our local congressman Steve Womack was invited to speak. We started to ask questions about how this could have possibly happened without anybody knowing what was going on, because it seems like something we should have known about ahead of time. And that was our first instinct as a group, was to just start submitting FOIA requests, start looking for the information that we wanted to find, that we felt like we normally would have in a situation like this. And through those FOIA requests, we learned that the city had been in talks with Swarm Arrow for a long time. That Ron Maloney from the NWA Council, who Abel just spoke about, was very involved in bringing this company here, but that there had been communication on the federal, state, and local level with this company for over a year. And all of that information was kept relatively quiet through signing NDAs, or claiming that there was, you know, a reason to not share that information publicly because it was just standard business talk and nothing like special. Which is ironic because Fayetteville as a city is rather anti-war and also very concerned about everything that develops in the city. Where Sarah's a city council member, she can speak to this. Our city council meetings go to like 2 or 3 a.m. pretty often because people do show up to speak on things. Zoning issues take forever to resolve in Fayetteville. And so the fact that a company like this, that is this diametrically opposed to the core values Fayetteville professes, was able to pop up was a big warning sign for us. And so by the end of the week, Sarah and I had discovered that we could submit an appeal to the company's business license, and that bought us some time to make sure that it was zoned correctly, to make sure there was no way that this was just going to happen without the people having some sort of say or ability to push back at least a little bit. And so we were able to actually have that appeal on their business license. We were able to prepare, along with several other groups. We were able to collectively come together and talk to the people of Fayetteville about what they thought about this company, and spread the information about what this company is actually doing, and point out, rightly so, that it is not in line with what the city of Fayetteville considers to be a light manufacturing operation. And we really went very hard into our municipal development code, which was very nicely laid out by city staff. We knew exactly what we needed to go for. So we really got really into the weeds with what zoning decisions were allowed in our city. And that became the main way that we organized, is by staying hyper local and circulating information, circulating calls to action, and also continuously putting pressure on local officials as we did that, to make sure that we're getting as much information as possible and as much engagement as possible with the community. We were successful in this appeal, and we were able to get them to a place where they have to either rezone the property, move, or appeal it again. And then today we did find out that they are appealing the decision of our appeal to the City Council of Fayetteville. So we are going to be preparing for that as well in a similar fashion. But throughout this process, we also learned of Northwest Arkansas Council's work and Ron Maloney's work. And that's what really made us start looking at this IDA operation, the Industrial Development Authority that was proposed to our county, Quorum Court, and then as well for the county north and south of us, Benton County and Madison County. Thankfully, Madison County really did not want anybody to be able to have eminent domain or any of these unregulated powers over their land. So the people of Madison County came out to defend their own county without having to be organized by an outside group, which was nice on our part. We didn't have to do a lot of advocating for the people in those small towns in Madison County. And then Benton County last night, or not last night, that was Monday, wasn't it? Had their
Monday.
They were forced to hear the IDA again last Monday, and they rejected it as well in the wake of all of this information coming out about what the IDA's purpose is and how much weapons manufacturing and potential data centers and other things could be an issue down the line if we pass this. So yeah, it's been a really amazing process to be a part of. I think we could probably all agree that it's been a really wonderful rallying point for our community to collectively agree that we don't want weapons manufacturing in Northwest Arkansas. And this grassroots effort has really been proven to work really well on the local level.
One thing that's interesting is that I keep hearing these reports that this issue is really bringing people from across the spectrum together, like Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Libertarians, rural people, city people. It's really bringing people together. And what interests me, though, is that a lot of the arguments, though, are eminent domain, which is a huge element that that private companies would be able to take your land versus the government usually is able to take your land. So a lot of landowners are worried about that. But what concerns me is that the state legislature is considering taking the eminent domain power out of the IDA, so then they would still potentially have a greater chance of being established after this. But well, that's why I feel like so many people are focused on the eminent domain that come to some of the meetings. But I really try to drive home the military element that might go less mentioned, but I think that is so important to try to make sure everyone takes that part of it very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all. You all touched on two really important points, and I want to try and get to both of them before we get to the question and answer section. So, I guess, and this was what I was saying for the end, but I think people would be really interested to hear about it. And Jesse, you touched on it. For all the speakers, and we'll start again with you, Sarah. Can you just share with us how you were able to break down the barriers of the geographical and organizational, silos, to really get everybody together to collaborate and focus on the singular goal of defeating this? Because, like you mentioned, geographically across 3 counties, and the multiple organizations in Northwest Arkansas. I mean, that's no small feat. Really impressive work to get everybody together to unite against this. And I think other people would be really interested to hear, like, if this happens in my city, how do we replicate this? How do I get these people together to fight this? Like, what are some basic steps I can do? Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know that we have like the special sauce, but I just think what I see in pockets of the country too that I'm lucky enough to just like travel to and get to know new neighbors across the country is like we're in community together organizing on many fronts and we work with each other every day. So it's not like this was just like the thing. Many of us were already, we're doing work on, Palestine, we were doing work on mass incarceration, we were doing work on, getting resources for our unhoused community. We were doing everyday work. And so it wasn't a huge stretch to already be in rapport and already in community with folks. And so when you're already as an organization, like we've been working for 7 years, really deep in the trenches, COVID relief work, direct aid work. We've opened a community hub. And so it's easy at those times to just put the call out and to know that you have neighbors that care and to just have like 30 people show up in a room and say like, I want us to respond to this. And we start looking around and we're like, well, our organizations collectively are like probably over 1,000 people at least. And so, that has power really quickly in a community. And so I would just encourage, it's that first step, right? It's like, we've all done immigration responses over the years. We have, gone and supported whenever there's maybe been disaster or struggle in another part of our community. And so, we owe each other. We show up for each other. And so I think that was like what Jesse kind of talked to is that like it's been really hard. It's hard in the South. So shout out to our brothers and sisters that are from Southern states that are here. The South is one of the least resourced. We get very little focus, and it's where a lot of the really insidious and scary archetyping happens. And they figure out the frameworks. This is where the private prison industry was grown out of our, plantation style, slave, a prison system down in Southern Arkansas. And so it's really important that, we kind of come together, around these and it's all the things, trying to get out of poverty and trying to push back. And so I think every area will have their own unique makeup, but I just think it is just starting to show up in that first time and building a relationship with people that you can count on ongoing. And, I think too, it's just part of it is being willing to just try things you haven't tried before and like learn new maneuvers that maybe you haven't tried before. So I think we do a lot of openness to and leaning in together to really talk about like what we do know, but what we don't know. And like, I think that in the past, you probably haven't seen people organizing and getting into the minutia of land policy, right? But like every little pinch point that we can think about that gums up systems is important. And because of the different orgs that are around, they have the possibility of you've got attorneys, you've got people who maybe have expertise in that particular industry or they've gone through that. You've got previous folks maybe were in the military, and, we're talking to people who are currently university students, right, that are, building and part of this research that, they're not okay with that as a pathway. And they're able to speak, very strongly and firsthand knowledge of exactly what's happened and what they're told and they're not told. And they can speak directly to, the critique and the struggle of what that's putting, these brilliant, bright minds, in front of. So thanks for letting me run on and on and on. But I mean, I think like Jesse, though, I was just the one thing is I was very encouraged because I love Arkansas. I'm a lifelong Arkansan. I love Fayetteville. And, there's so many of us across the nation that like our communities are these like, they're your hopeful place. Like you've decided to call them home. You're very tied to them. You want your community to prosper. And so I think sometimes in these like moments of struggle, right, you have this incredible growth too in your community and you just see the best and all this hopefulness in your community too. So we don't want to be struggling all the time, but it does at least have the silver lining that you see all this incredible like talent and passion and enthusiasm of your community. And it just makes me love Fayetteville more and love Arkansas more when I see us show up in that way.
Yeah, it has been very inspiring to show up to the, quorum court meetings where everybody showed up to speak against these and standing next to just the most random other individuals that you can imagine showing up to speak out against it. And you want to stay afterwards and talk to those people and be like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. We've never rubbed elbows any other way. Abel, go ahead and give us your thoughts on, how we're breaking down those silos.
And in terms of organizing everything, yeah, I mean, I've done a dozen kinds of organizing over the last 20 something years. And it was really, again, the Iraq war that got me on moving on all this because, I saw the mass murder of Iraq based on a pile of lies. And, I've dabbled in a bunch of different organizations, Occupy Wall Street. I was a regional director for a drug policy reform campaign. And lots of different things. And I've done a lot of journalism but I think, I guess in a way, organizing, I felt I've kind of come to the conclusion that like writing is more everybody has different talents and so forth. And I feel like writing is a little bit more of my talent and in a way that is a kind of organizing though. I encourage everyone to practice writing, and so that's where a lot of I'm doing now is, and a lot of what I felt like I've been impactful in recent events is I've written some key letters to the editor of the Democrat Gazette, and a lot of people have come up to me and said that was really meaningful. They didn't even know any of this was going on. That really got them to some of these industrial authority meetings, and they told me thank you. And so I encourage everyone to write letters to the editor and keep writing on social media. And write for journals. I'm gonna try to write I'm in the process of writing an article about a lot of this for Covert Action magazine. And again, also this is organizing isn't just about, I think, organizing people. It's also about organizing ideas and organizing our minds. Everything comes down to consciousness and ideas. And if we can all get our minds aligned, then organizing in the streets becomes even easier. And one thing I would point to is, so what moved me on a lot is I've always been into like getting to the roots of the problem. What are the biggest problems? What are the root causes that are causing all these problems? And for me, a big core of it has been, yeah, the military industrial complex, war profiteering, and also imperialism. And I really would encourage anyone to, I feel like I want to touch on this because it's not immediately part of this conversation. And I know you're part of the Imperial Working Group, but I wrote an article called Silent Propaganda on U.S. Imperialism causes confused Americans. It's in Covert Action magazine. I really spent quite some time writing that article with a lot of references in it. But I feel like it's such an important piece because a lot of people get the military industrial complex and they get the war profiteering, but I think in terms of some, I know all y'all surely understand imperialism, but most Americans don't for real. And I feel like there's various elements of the propaganda that makes it that way. I mean, there's outright lies like Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, and then there's Hollywood myth making. They always make the soldiers in our wars, we're the good guys, we're spreading freedom and democracy, all this kind of thing. And then there's distortions about things. But I think the biggest of all is really omission. It's the propaganda by omission, and it's what's not talked about. You never hear imperialism mentioned in a critical way on mainstream media. You never hear it in presidential debates. Most mainstream candidates never talk about it in a critical way. Even within academia, most professors never talk about it. I didn't have any courses at the university. I went to the university for 8 years, graduate, undergrad. I never had a course that really dug into a serious critique of imperialism. And the propaganda is part of it, but then it's also like, how does imperialism function? And it makes it, because most Americans don't understand it, including a lot of professors don't understand it. It makes it, when you read the newspaper or watch the news, you don't understand world events correctly. And you don't understand the proper context to put everything in. You don't know how this works. And you don't understand how sanctions and economic warfare that have killed 38 million people, you don't understand, how all that works. And, or the CIA coups, we've overthrown dozens of countries, including democracies, and which totally destroys the idea that we're out there, the American empire, the 800 foreign military bases, we're out there spreading freedom and democracy. No, we overthrow democracies and we give arms to 70% of the world's dictators. I mean, I really just want to make sure to try to bring that issue up, even though it's not an immediate part of this, because so many people really need to try to understand imperialism. But thankfully, in a way, Trump has kind of changed it, because there's the classical empires where you have explicit colonies of the British Empire and so forth. But American imperialism is kind of different. You could argue it's a neo-imperialism because it functions with all these puppet governments. You have these puppet dictatorships or puppet democracies where you put these puppet leaders in, and so, but Trump is kind of in a way reverting back to the classical imperialism. So it's kind of opening more people's eyes up. But there's still, I think people still struggle to understand it. And even a lot of professors I know that are highly educated, they get various conflicts wrong because they don't understand it. They'll get one conflict right. So one will get Gaza right, but they'll get Ukraine wrong. Or, this kind of thing happens all the time. And because they don't fully understand how imperialism works, they're very confused about any given conflict. But anyway, I just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, we do have a lot of misinformation out there, especially in terms of understanding of geopolitical stuff. Jesse, what are your thoughts on breaking down the barriers for organizing?
Yeah, so Sarah touched on this a little bit. This was not the first time a lot of our groups worked together, or a lot of these individuals that were working on this met each other. Um, Several of us have met in so many different contexts. But the good news about that is that there are people working in these contexts in pretty much every community across the US, because we have to. There is probably somebody working on food insecurity or housing insecurity or just houselessness in general in your community, and they care just as much as you do about what kinds of companies are coming in and what they're doing to your local economy. There's probably somebody in your neighborhood at all times who's worried about the environment or local ecology, and they're just as worried about the pollution that these big businesses would have as you are, as somebody who's against the weapons industry. And so when we're looking around and asking ourselves what kind of groups we want to work with, um, a lot of it is these groups that we've already met, but it was truly a special thing to see in Fayetteville, that people were willing to listen not only about how this weapons manufacturing would be bad, but how it would harm people abroad and at home. And so we were able to connect with a lot of subsections of our population that don't normally show up for things like protests for Palestine, maybe. Maybe they don't see that as the most efficient use of their time, but they did see, oh, in this case, I can lay hands on a material condition that is going to change the way my life works and the way the lives of those outside of the US works. And so presenting this opportunity, not just as a collaboration for like leftist groups or not just as something that progressive people should fight against, but presenting it as like, no, this is a way that your life is going to get much worse, and they're doing it so they can hurt other people. And that's not a good enough reason. And so being able to present the actual changes to communities that happen when production facilities like this exist, to be able to present like what it would be like to live underneath swarms of giant killer drones. It's not hard to convince people that those things are bad, and it's really easy to connect those things to the realities of living somewhere like Gaza or living somewhere like southern Lebanon right now, where those, or Iran right now. It's really easy to connect the plight of what the US, the imagined fear of what it would be like to live under these things, um, is very connected to the real fear of people who are already experiencing them abroad. And so it was really inspiring to see people come together on this issue in that way. And unfortunately, some of us had already come together because of hardships that our community is facing, whether that was our housing crisis that brought us to some of our neighbors, or the current situation going on in Northwest Arkansas related to uh, the um, the trafficking of immigrant neighbors by ICE. Several of us had already met and were already working together on projects. So when this came up as something that was a very defeatable enemy, it was very, very inspiring and very what's the word? It gave us a new breath, I think, in organizing spaces to see that we would get a win here. Because we did get a win, at least for now. It's going to come back in about a month,
Mhm.
but
Don't know that we
um,
thought we were going to get a win. I'd like to say that. I kind of thought we were going to get a no. Let's be honest.
I was
okay,
surprised.
they were pessimists. I saw it and I was like, oh, this is like we could beat these guys. They're not ready for this. And so I think for some of us, it was the more realistic win than what we've been fighting for a while. With Arkansas's 287G laws, it's really hard to fight ICE because every sheriff's department is required to work with them. With the war in Gaza being, or the genocide in Gaza, not war, being almost 3 years out now, and our current sitting senator saying that he would throw protesters off the bridge in Little Rock if we blocked the street. We don't have a lot of hope in our spaces. And so to be able to offer a lot of people who've been working on issues that seem rather hopeless for a long time now, a little bit of like, this is a hyper local issue that we can win in a very short amount of time. It was really cool to give that to the organizing spaces that already exist while also connecting with our broader community, and seeing how that mix brought new energy into the space.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big deal to get a win that quick for some folks who showed up, for the first time or they were early on. Especially, we had a lot of young people showing up in the space. And so they felt that encouragement to keep going. And that was, it was funny for some of us, right, who've been doing things for a long time and hearing no a lot, not having success. So I saw, them light up, and I just thought, this is going to light a fire for them showing up, them putting their voice forward, will help them to show up in spaces where they don't feel as comfortable in the future. So I think that was a big benefit as well. We'll have another swing at it at City Council and probably another swing at it at Circuit Court. So it's not over, but
One
We
quick
take the
question.
win.
Well, I guess now that Swarms appealed it to the city council, I'm wondering what kind of are the main arguments. I mean, that their business, it seemed to me that their business license can be revoked for if it's harmful to the peace, safety, and health of the community. I mean, is there a good strategy for that? I mean, I certainly feel like it's harming my psychological health to be right next door to it. And I mean, I've already been psychologically harmed by our endless wars. I mean, I feel the pain of all these people, and I don't see how people can't be psychologically harmed by all this mass killing all the time, endless mass killing that our government's doing. I don't know if that's an argument that can be made to the city council that psychological harm is part of that. If we had a anti-war psychologist to help make that argument, I'm not sure what the plan is. Or
Well, I mean, I think we have a lot of thoughts for sure, and we'll unveil them the night of the city council meeting.
okay, all right.
We're kind of at the end for we'll have to switch over to questions really quick. But I did want to retouch on the university thing really quick. Because the U of A was collaborative, and the city, Jesse, you had mentioned the collaboration. So how important, it came up really quick, how important was the FOIA requests in terms of setting the timeline and getting everything in the row to act on this with the information correct? And Sarah, if you can also help out for people who are in communities where they don't have a resource like we have with AJRC, or another really close by legal aid. What's the best way they can learn to do those requests and get that information if they see this starting to happen in their communities?
Sarah, I'll let you take that question first, and then I'll talk about how important they were to our process.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would encourage, again, it's going to be state specific. Arkansas has like one of the best sunshine laws called the Freedom of Information Act. And so, if I were in my office, I'm displaced because they're playing chess next door in our community hub. My office is back there, but I have a Bible, the FOIA Bible. So, I would encourage, folks in the climate that we live in to really get familiar with like what your ability to be able to get records, to access, public meeting spaces, to be able to get your own taxpayer funded, body cameras and public film cameras as those are, going like being able to access any, records and documents that are happening with your taxpayer money. But it's incredibly important just because, while you hope that every person that's representing our interest in our state is approaching subject matter, in good faith and that, they're defaulting towards full transparency, those protections that we have through like Freedom of Information Acts allow for us to make those requests. I mean, a lot of times if they're like ours, it's a verbal, it's actually just even a conversation, a phone call, seeing somebody in a meeting, asking for the records is enough. An email, a fax you could still do. I mean, and they have to produce those records. In the state of Arkansas, there's a time limit on it. There's 3 business days. It says, that if you are not the custodian of the record and somebody's asked you for it, you have to let them know like who the custodian is. So we play that fun game sometimes where like, not me, right? Like I don't have the NDA. That person doesn't have the NDA. Well, who should I be going to? Quit burning time. And, I think the unfortunate thing too is just we also live in an age too where, we've created acceptability of just like breaking the law by certain folks. And like that's just like, okay. So I also don't want to say that just because you have a law that won't be like broken. And so I would also encourage you to start to speak with like local folks in your legal community who might have a soft spot for open records and might potentially, lend you some support. You can file lawsuits in the state of Arkansas and other states pro se on your own. It's challenging for sure. It will cost a little bit out of pocket to be able to file. And so I know for so many of us, the financial outlays and like access to an attorney can be, very prohibitive. But for us over time, we've tried to gain expertise as we've done this over time. I've had the opportunity that we tap into someone that was in the paralegal space for a number of years and great like researchers. And tapping into just those different talents you have, but uh, not being afraid to just ask. I think it's okay to like have curious questions. Like, sometimes people are like, you get into the niceties or you want to be friends with people in your community, maybe live in a small community, and any kind of question can make something seem like you're being critical, but just, feeling very secure in the fact that you probably have some level of a law that's in your state that allows for you to be able to access your records, trying to understand kind of what the specifics are, looking at that language. But oftentimes, I mean, you can get, almost everything with some, carve outs for certain redactions. If it's like an employee record or, there's like maybe some competitive information or like sensitive personal information, date of birth, like social security numbers, things like that, they'll redact those. But like in the state of Arkansas, we can ask for almost about anything with just some carve out exceptions in the state. And so we do that because so many people are not willing to have the conversations in the public. And so that causes us to have that, need to make that request and to be able to understand. And I think, that was the thing with Swarmero that was, I think, kind of, alarming, kind of like hit some of us probably in the face was like, I think we really think our community values like transparency. And so it felt like, all these things were happening and all these conversations were happening in the background. And we didn't know about it until someone FOIA'd and someone FOIA'd in the community and they sent it to me as an elected official. And I thought, oh, it's like, I was just so surprised. And so, yeah, I would just encourage folks at the very least to even just, ask those curious questions and make the inquiries. And then, the next step is to just kind of try to get to know what your local state law and protections actually are.
Thank you. Jesse.
Yeah. And those requests were extremely useful to us because when we were presenting our case to the Board of Appeals, or Board of Adjustments, we were trying to appeal the zoning decision made for this factory. And because we were trying to go for something so specific, it helped us to gain as much information as possible. So these Freedom of Information Act requests were able to gain us a lot of information about what was communicated with the city and Swarm Arrow about the property. But we also learned that the city staff had signed NDAs with this company years ago. And so that was alarming and also granted a certain level of like um, seriousness to people that we talked to in the city of Fayetteville about this because we value transparency, like Sarah said. Telling people just that the city signed an NDA with this company and that we didn't know the contents of what was spoken about with city staff after that point did alarm a lot of people and brought in a lot more eyes on the situation. Um, but even just from what we were able to learn, we actually included a timeline of communications and public information that was available during our presentation. And that was very helpful for laying out potential discrepancies between how the business was presenting itself publicly versus how it presented itself in their application for their zoning or for their business license with the city. And so that was crucial information. If we hadn't submitted those requests, we wouldn't have had that. And then as far as the connection to the university goes, that was really helpful with mobilizing students because it's a state university. They're subject to the same laws in Arkansas as any other government entity. And so finding out that the school was so tied to it was really helpful to organize students and also even get some staff from the university to look into it a little bit further and ask hard questions of the people in charge of the university. Put a little bit of pressure on the chancellor, who was so bold as to speak at the opening of the Swarm Arrow facility. But that said, it's like Sarah said, it's not perfect. I mean, the NDAs kept us from learning a lot, but also we still don't, I think, have all of the information from the university from that FOIA request. And so that means, like, even though it's in law that they have 3 business days, they have still refused to comply.
Mhm.
And so there is a path forward for that. And so I don't want anybody to hear that and get discouraged and think these laws aren't helpful. They are. you can sue for those records. It's a thing. But like Sarah said, that is really hard to do if you're financially struggling already as a community. Having the money to bring forward a lawsuit is always going to be a preventative measure. But we were able to get enough information um, that we could get into the hands of the general public that people were able to take stronger and more informed action because of that.
Awesome.
I
And
can.
just, I know people are curious, for the zoning, will you tell everybody how you caught these people on the zoning and got that, got pushed back with that?
Yeah. So in our city, if you want to rezone a property, you have to have a public hearing, and that's the same case in a lot of places. And so they attempted to open this facility under light manufacturing as their current zoning use. Um, and that is what we argued against. We said that this operation producing machinery of this size and of the quantity that they're advertising, specifically, they said they were going to produce at World War II aircraft production rates. Um, our argument was that this would be qualified as what's called heavy manufacturing in our zoning code rather than light manufacturing. And so it's really like splitting hairs between what these definitions of different use units are in our zoning code. And our city has a really interesting zoning code that Sarah could probably speak to at much greater length than I could because it takes so long to update. And this is a very, very intense process that city staff spends a lot of time on. And these decisions are not made lightly, but also they don't get these types of appeals very often where there's a lot of information to consider. So they had to consider things like what types of materials are being used, how flammable or explosive those materials are, what type of manufacturing processes go into making these types of drones. It was honestly a really informative project to be working on
Learned
as
a
an
lot,
organizer.
didn't we?
We learned so much about
So
aircraft
much.
production. Um,
I know too much
but
about
Yeah, but ultimately, this just came down to whether or not the city could justifiably consider this light manufacturing versus heavy manufacturing. And a lot of city zoning codes have distinctions for businesses like that. And so when it comes to challenging a company like this that's coming into a community, it is worth looking into what your zoning code allows for and what the property is zoned for. Because if you can do what we did and force a rezone, then there's more public input required in order to change that property zoning. And that's why we ultimately went for this, is because um, we can't outright just stop them from operating as a legal business in the state of Arkansas, but we could force them to reapply the correct zoning. And to rezone a property, you do have to have those public hearings. You have to notify everyone in the residential area surrounding the building, or the property, and you have to let the public comment openly about whether or not they want this type of work being done in Fayetteville. Sarah, correct me if I've gotten anything wrong there, but
And I think,
that's what
well,
we're fighting for.
like with your question though about like how we even came upon this is like, we as Abel kind of spoke to, like we were kind of alerted that there was going to be this ribbon cutting. So, we were already behind on like what had happened. I think we really were just kind of autopsying and trying again, ask those like curious probing questions about like, how did this happen? Like, where is this in the process? And so I guess that would just be another encouragement around like, for us, it was like, well, is this a done deal? It was like, how final is it? Like, how far down the road is it? I mean, you're having a ribbon cutting, but there's nothing in the building. I mean, that was one thing too. The building was totally empty inside. And so I think it really was honestly, it was just luck that this was an avenue because as soon as we started making inquiries and asking those questions, it was like, well, you are within the time frame to make an appeal to the business license determination. Now, had we been outside of that time frame when we would have learned, we would have not had that as an avenue, right? We would have been exploring other things. And so sometimes just in your digging and curiosity and trying to kind of like get to the bottom of things, you might find, an additional avenue like that that you didn't necessarily know was going to be available.
Um, we're at the 8:45 mark, so I don't mean to hard cut anybody off, but I know I've seen some questions pop up. and people are very interested to ask you questions and have me shut up. So I will turn over to Matt, and I believe we've got some questions from the audience.
Yes, we do. I think we'll go to Joshua's first, though, so as not to lose them. Joshua, who, of course, I should say, I co-convene the anti-war, anti-working group along with Joshua, but he is currently running for office, and he does have some questions I think that are pretty important. So let's see. Yeah, he asked, would this form of organizing help fight similar things such as data centers and municipal service districts, where the municipality cedes power to business alliances for certain areas of the city, county?
I would say yes, absolutely. Honestly, fear of a data center was one of the big drivers for public input about this industrial development authority. That was one of the things that was listed as like a possibility of the types of business that could be coming in. And that was a thing that people in our area do not want at all, because we've seen what happens, in places that get data centers. And so that is something that this is definitely the type of organizing that you could do around that if there's some sort of um, uh, business alliance, I guess is the phrase being used in the question, being used to like gain power over land use in a certain city or county. Um, but I
I
don't
think
know
just
how it
watch
works.
out for is just being aware of like state preemptions. That's one thing that will continue to be a challenge. Like we're a speck of like a more progressive city and a very conservative state. And so it's very common where we pass like a styrofoam ban and then the state, came in and did a preemption. So like we weren't able to do that. We've done a civil rights ordinance and then, the state has done something. And I did a cap on rental fees for doing like application fees, and the state then did a preemption. So I mean that's another thing too, especially in the South. Those of you that are situated in the South, is that it doesn't come without the pitfalls of like you might have like some state having to thread the needle too on things you may not be able to necessarily like define or challenge in a certain way. I mean, we had in the state of Arkansas that you could not ban outright data centers in your community in the previous two legislative sessions ago, in your municipality, even when, we'd seen the impacts and, there were concerns that were kind of coming up at that time. So I just want to at least put that there, is that that can be a challenge in those areas where you fight that local and state control.
I keep reading lots of reports about these AI data centers coming into communities, and city administrators often are signing NDAs too, and that they're doing this to try to prevent public pushback. And it seems like it was the same dynamic here with Swarm Arrow signing NDAs. They're trying to keep it hush hush so that people don't rise up to stop it. So it's just something to keep an eye out for.
All right. For those of you who are attending, feel free to use the Q&A question. There's a special spot for that. I'm gonna follow up from the chat really quickly, I suppose. Because there was a follow-up kind of question about that. Again, from Joshua Bradley of North Carolina. As a political candidate for local office, how would one use a campaign to call out the city government and get people to pay attention to this stuff?
Um, I guess I could take that one. So I don't know if Joshua knows this. We do have a local candidate who is doing that. Sort of. So one of our local political candidates is running for city attorney this year. His name is DJ Deutsch, and he actually has been using his campaign platform to bring this issue to light as it's developed, both the Industrial Development Authority and the Swarm Arrow appeal situation, because he's taking his stance that like all the reasons he's running for, but namely making sure that there is more transparency within the office that he's running for, is something that he sees as an issue in this case. And so he's using his campaign platform not just to talk about this issue, but to talk about how our local government should be working and how it's not working the way that it's expected to in this particular case. And so it's been really interesting to see that happen. Um, I know that, well, Sarah's currently a city council member, but also all three of us have run for office at some point. And so I'm pretty sure we could all say that, you get a lot of eyes on you, especially in a city like Fayetteville, where everybody cares about well, not everybody, but most people care about what's going on in City Hall. And so it's really interesting to see people take advantage of that spotlight and shine it on issues that are affecting everybody else and not just their own campaign.
Interesting too that where they've passed data centers. I saw at least I think one or two cities in Missouri where they've replaced a lot of the city council that voted to support the data centers. They've replaced them. So I would assume the same thing could happen with Swarm if we have a number of city councils members not kind of follow the public will.
I would just follow up to say, though, I mean, I think we have to like think about what the realities are in so many communities. I mean, we're in the South, right? We're in a progressive pocket. The way that I've run in Fayetteville, if I were in another city, might not be the same approach. And so, I came to this work in elected office from community organizing already, being in this abolition work in space. So people knew what they were getting with me, I feel like. And, I think, we talk a lot about having to, kind of like, code switch. And, I think I want to at least express that there is, challenges in certain communities, right, where you're having to really kind of walk a fine line between there are certain concerns raised in your community, but there might be other viewpoints. And it's important to get voices that come from different experiences and backgrounds into elected office to be representative of parts of our population. And so I at least want to uplift and voice that, sometimes that does mean that your language slightly, changes. It doesn't mean you change who you are, what you stand for, but I think like sometimes your approach just does have to, much like we talk about like narrative change work and trying to expand these conversations. I think it can just look different in the way you potentially, approach it and message it, depending on kind of where you're located and what challenges you face too.
Okay. Well, from the Q&A we have Anonymous asks, lack of local media, not enough journalist papers in these Arkansas communities, the military industry industrials are targeting. Are there a lack of media outlets in these particular communities? I is what they're asking.
We used to have a really good independent paper, the Free Weekly in Fayetteville, but that kind of ended. It had a lot more radical journalism. I used to write for it, and they shut it down and turned it into an entertainment paper. So now we're kind of left. We have the Democrat Gazette, which thankfully they publish a lot of my letters that I write about these issues. So I'm not sure about other communities what their papers are like.
Well, and traditional media is just challenged across the board. I mean, I think that's the recognition. Like we have currently one of our previous meteorologists that was in the business for 20 years was talking about how the two major TV networks are looking at combining. I mean, what kind of like monopoly in that it will be our Arkansas local news would be coming out of decisions being made like in Texas from, a place far, far away from us. And so I think for a while, I think there was compression, but I think like we're seeing kind of like the pendulum swing, and you are starting to see these like small, gritty upstarts that are happening in Arkansas, I think in other pockets of the country where I'm, super excited, around immigration coverage, around, more like local embedded more investigative type work. And so, it is more challenging. There's, not a lot of people, not a lot of funding. But whenever they, they do get on these issues, they know the communities better and they're embedded. And so the coverage that they do give is like very rich. And so it gets uplifted throughout our communities and our networks and kind of shared and helps to really spread the word on things. And that's like, we have one of our JPs, JP Evelyn Rio Stafford, and she's a two-time Emmy award-winning journalist who now sits on our quorum court. And they've been one of the folks in our community who's done a lot of digging in regard to kind of what's been happening behind the scenes of IDA and starting to like research and tie a lot of this stuff together, right? And so, I mean, we do have these bright spots in our community where, folks just show up and show interest and then, these things get elevated. But I think we're all probably challenged with like the traditional news strains. And I think, it's all these like specialized, like we've had, Bolt magazine coming to our area and, all kinds of different journalist endeavors they're not kind of like the main ones that you would think about that I think give us those opportunities. But I think it'll continue to be challenged going
I think
forward.
we're fortunate to have pretty good local news stations around here too that cover a lot of activist protests and things like that. More so, and then also I think on social media, I mean, different generations are on different social media. I guess I'm older generation. I'm on Facebook, and I see a lot of these groups that people are forming groups in Northwest Arkansas in different areas, and a lot of really important information about the IDA and stuff is shared on these groups. So I think forming groups on social media is helpful.
Following the money is important because, correct me if I'm wrong, and we've said the Northwest Arkansas Democrat Gazette a couple of times, but I believe we've come to find out that they are also they have members on the board for the Development Authority.
The university chancellor is too. I think he's on with it.
So,
Yes.
so it would be difficult to get an unbiased opinion from them, I would think.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges, as Sarah was saying, with local or not local, with these traditional news media outlets. It's not only are you fighting to have coverage in the first place, because maybe that media outlet that is your most local thing is not near your hometown. Say in Camden, they're not going to have as much news coverage as Little Rock or Fayetteville will because we have local stations in our towns. But in addition to that, the nearest station to them probably has somewhat of a financial interest in making sure that these businesses are not talked about in a negative light on the air as well, or in print, I should say, because they may be part of something like the IDA as well. Um, yeah, it's the Northwest Arkansas Council is that lobbying group from local businesses, and the Northwest Arkansas Democrat Gazette is a part of that, along with all the other players that we've mentioned. We've got Walmart, we've got Tyson, we've got so many other things. But because it's made up of local businesses, that local paper is in that business category. So,
Sorry, Matt. Do we have time for a couple more?
We have time for a few more. Yes. So next, again, an anonymous attendee. Let's see. Their question is, are we trying to reach out to the workers of the military industry complex? Are these workers unreachable? To understand how, without their labor, that these offensive wars would be called into question much faster with withholding their labor, and if these workers are too far gone, is it time to change our language about how we talk about these workers and begin labeling them as class traitors and law enforcement is as law enforcement is labeled? There's a hard one for you.
Jesse, we may press you on that one, just in terms of like what it looks like in Camden, and then Sarah or Abel, if you have thoughts.
yeah, this I'm not gonna pretend to not be biased here. My entire family is from South Arkansas. You say you're 6 degrees of separation from anybody. I'm probably 1 degree of separation from people who work for these companies. It's not a nice thing to think about considering someone a class traitor if they work for these weapons manufacturers, but also you have to consider what someone's devoting their life to. Um, you know, we may not understand fully what role we play in the imperial arm of the United States. But if someone is willing to earn their paycheck from a weapons manufacturing companies and can sleep well at night, knowing what those weapons are used for, it is pretty hard for me to consider that person uh, a member of the same working class that I'm fighting for, in the same way at least. But as we've talked about already tonight, and as was just mentioned in the comments, not everybody understands imperialism to the same extent. Education in Arkansas is abysmal, and I get to say that because I teach at a high school. So it is we are low in education for a reason. It's very hard to have an educated proletariat that's going to happily go work in the weapons manufacturing industry. Um, People don't want to build rockets that kill children for a living generally. And limited news coverage, the targeting of journalists, all these things that are affecting the actual truth from coming out of how these weapons are being used abroad also contributes to this very narrow worldview that a lot of the people in these communities have in South Arkansas about what these companies do. Um, they're they're being shielded from a certain amount of information, and also they're most likely, if I would guess, a lot of these workers are coming from communities where there are not a lot of prospects. My family, a good significant portion of my family is from a town of less than 300 people in South Arkansas, and they don't want to go anywhere else. That is all they've known for 5 generations on one side of their family, and they're not leaving their great grandparents um, alone in that town with no one to help them out. And so they're working in whatever business they can find. Now, thankfully, none of my family members are working for these companies specifically. But I don't think it's that these people don't care about anybody or completely selfish entirely. I think it's that the worldview of a lot of the folks in these small towns and in these areas is shaped by lack of economic prospect, desperation and hard times, and also just a very specific set of um, media that's allowed to enter them through the mainstream. And so while that might be a nice way to put it, for people who are still contributing to the weapons manufacturing industry, I don't want to say that I don't want to say that anyone is unreachable. I'm from the same area. I'm from a small town in South Arkansas. I'm not better than my cousins just because I do this work now. Um, and also they're not better than me because they stayed home near their grandparents, you know. We're all fighting to have a good life. And I know that when I talk to them about this, they do care, and they're not community members who are going to be okay with these types of companies in their town. The question is, are there organizations or are there any groups of people that are actually trying to organize around this? And that's been an issue for Friends of Palestine and Arkansas. We've been looking for what groups in South Arkansas are willing to take action collectively about this. Um, it's really hard to take action collectively when individual people in these communities are pressed and times are hard. But I know that there are people organizing in these communities to take care of each other. So my ears are open, and I'm not giving up yet that there are people there that are still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about in the depressed communities, but I think like also talking about the difference too of like with what's being approached too with this like higher tech and looking at the university. is that we've already started to have a lot of conversation. And you're right. I mean, talking to workers and organizing around workers is incredibly important. But I mean, these are young minds who are trying to start off. They're, brilliant, and they have these careers ahead of them, and they want to be world changers. And, they're faced with this incredible moral dilemma because, a lot of their academic careers are being like paid for, and their educational pathways are all formed by what the university offers them. And if they only offer them this, right, there is this challenge that we're starting to talk to students about. And that's what they're banking on being able to do, is just pipe these students. But they're also, there's the challenge too of there'll be transplant workforce that'll come in that does have this like higher degree of skill set that's for the specific industry. So they're not of our community, don't have the same ethos, don't feel tied. And so I think that, just presents an opportunity for, how we do challenge that. But it was really eye-opening for me during the IDA conversation, because we actually did have a worker who talked about the fact that they had been participatory in previous productions, and later, after they had worked at a couple of these type facilities, it hit them and dawned on them, and they really had this like moral implosion and like mental health like crises about the impact of like what they had participated in and what that had done. And I thought that was really powerful, to hear that story and to kind of amplify that we talk about the well-being and the prosperity of everyone, and that we think these are higher paying jobs, but at the end of the day, we deteriorated a human, and somebody's saying like, I had a worse life, I had a bad outcome, because I was participatory in this type of system that you guys were telling me again was like going to make me, better, make me more money. And so I think it's important to kind of elevate those, human elements too, of like, folks down the road, who participate in these types of systems, have these like huge implosions that then, impact their families, and how they can be participatory, in a positive way in their communities going forward.
Just that if you drive from Fayetteville to Dallas, you go through a town called McAllister, Oklahoma, and it's one of the biggest weapons producing places in the country. And they have a giant bomb in the middle of the town. And as you drive down the street, there's a huge bomb in the middle on the side of the street there. And I think it says "bombs of freedom" or something like that. So again, it gets back to this issue of, or something about these bombs are for freedom. But it gets back to the issue of propaganda, and just most of these workers, I think, have to either are propagandized and believe that we're really just bombing all these countries for freedom and democracy, or to get the terrorists, or whatever the lie of the day is. But they kind of have to buy into that to kind of justify it in their minds that they're doing a good thing. Just like a lot of our soldiers, go into it thinking that they're just going in for defense, but they end up going to, kill or bomb people in another country for the empire, and then coming back and having PTSD. I have a bunch of veteran friends. One took his own life having PTSD after doing what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think it's a similar dynamic within the weapons producing industry. Is you have the same thing going on. I'm also reminded of, like, I think during World War II or World War I, you even had unions. Like, usually unions do a good thing, but you had unions lobbying for war at one time, though, because they thought that's what was in the interest of the working class in terms of their union. Our jobs are dependent on making these weapons, so this is good for the worker or something. But I think it gets back to this idea of conversion. Like, you have Lockheed has weapons producing parts in most congressional districts, but and so most congressmen don't want to say, hey, I'm going to cut the military budget and cut all these jobs. So we really have to, at some point as a nation, if we're going to evolve it, come to this point where instead of having all of our engineering students at the university, investing all their brain power and all this labor power into building weapons of destruction, spending trillions of dollars on destruction, that we have a conversion where maybe they should put all that brain power and labor into doing something productive, alternative energy or whatever it is, something besides building bombs, So I think we need this conversion to happen. I don't know. To tell people that you're not going to lose your job. You're going to have a job doing something else.
Thank you. I know here in Kentucky, people often take the jobs that are available. And I'd like to remind everybody out there that a lot of poor people, when they go to sleep at night, it's fitful, wondering how they're going to feed their kids the next day. And so I'm not sure that we should, to that question asker, I'm not sure that's the correct approach. If there are any other questions, please ask them now. Otherwise, we're going to have to probably, according to the message I received, gonna have to wrap it up. So if you have any questions, please ask them now. I'll give you a minute or two, well, a few seconds here. Doesn't look like it. Okay. Well, I'm gonna go on and turn it over now to the wrap up here.
Hey, comrades, I just wanted to thank everybody for participating in this. I think this is important information that's going to help a lot of people, and I think it'll work in more than just the defense. I think it'll work against data centers, and I think it'll work against corporate seizure of power from the people. And so I just wanted to thank all of y'all for giving this webinar. I think it was very interesting. Sorry about the live stream not issues, but as soon as we get this up, we're going to get it up. So, and we'll share it out. If you know, again, thank y'all for doing that. If you need anything from us as a group, as a working group, or as a party, let us know. And when I end the video, I'm going to have everybody's contact information up at the top of or have it in the background so they don't have to look at me. And thanks, Will, for bringing this to our attention. And does anybody have anything they want to end with? And again, thank you so much, comrades.
I had one last thing. I know they mentioned transparency and how Swarm Arrow goes against Fayetteville, our city's idea of transparency. I also want to just add on to how this weapons industry goes against. Actually, we had 20 years of mayors giving Hiroshima Nagasaki declarations. Mayor Jordan and Mayor Cootie every year would make a declaration against nuclear weapons. But then all of a sudden, we have the university being involved in building nuclear weapons. And actually, these AI drone weapons that we're building here now are considered. There's an international campaign to stop killer robots, and they say that this is the third generation of warfare after gunpowder, nuclear weapons, and AI drone weapons, and how these are really dangerous weapons. And now our city is making two of the worst kinds of weapons in the world. And I think that I just wanted to make sure that point was made. But it goes against the ethos of the city.
Thanks. Y'all were doing great work, and I certainly appreciate y'all getting on. Thank you very much.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank you all.
Thanks.